The Edmonton Oilers have one game remaining before the Four Nations face off against the Colorado Avalanche tonight. On today's show, a drop-down view of the Oilers' first 54 games of the regular season and an open-ended conversation about what's to come.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. So on today's show, a very open-ended episode here. I want to take an affirmative, a negative, and a final thoughts approach to this segment. You know, the kind of way you would argue a case in a court of law, because there are always two ways to look at things in the realm of sports. You can be optimistic, you can be pessimistic, and then there will be people who say you can be realistic. And I generally try to blend it all together and give you all of the information and give you how I feel. But I don't want my opinion to sway what you think. I want to lay this out for you as best I can, and you let me know which case you think works better. So we're going to start with the positive. Through 54 games, the Oilers have a very good record. To be sitting at 34-16-4 with 72 points and a .667 points percentage, a plus 31 goal differential in early February, that's quality. The Oilers, even if you feel they haven't played great hockey as of late, like I don't, frankly, I think the games this week in particular against St. Louis, Chicago, last week against Detroit, and look, I know Detroit's on a little bit of a heater at the moment, so it might not be as fair to lump them in with St. Louis and Chicago, but this looks like a tired team. This looks like a team that desperately needs this break that's ahead for Four Nations, but you cannot dispute the facts. And when your record is what it is, and you were able to orchestrate the type of in-season improvement the Oilers were from end of November through where we are now, where they've effectively been the best team in the league since November 23rd, and they've largely done it in piecemeal fashion. It hasn't just been quality depth. It hasn't been Connor and Leon going crazy. It's been sporadic. It's been spurts. Of course, Leon is having what I would qualify as a Hart Trophy caliber season. This is a remarkable season from a gifted player that's really, I don't want to say silencing the critics, because there are always going to be people who are skeptical of Draisaitl because they don't watch the games. There are going to be people who say, well, he plays on the power play with McDavid. Go look at Draisaitl's power play stats this year. Go look at his goal splits and try and tell me he's a McDavid merchant. That just tells me you don't know what you're talking about. It tells me you haven't done the research. Leon's 38 goals, 10 are on the power play. Let's use our brains here. Because yes, Leon's having a great season. And yes, the power play is a part of the game. And when we want to compare guys across teams, we do need to use context, who they play with, how much ice time they get, the deployment they get as far as offensive zone, defensive zone, what defensemen they most commonly get used with, if they kill penalties, if they're a power play guy. And yeah, there are some people who are going to say, well, he got so many points on the power play. You should count stats from guys who have more even strength points. Well, I hate to tell you, as of right now, Leon's got the strongest argument. He has supplemented his great offense with all-world defense. And you can make an argument, and I would make that argument, that Leon's been better than Connor for the first 54 games of the regular season. And it's a great, great luxury to have, where if the best player in the world is getting passed by a teammate, it doesn't mean you're having a bad season. You know, you look at some of these teams around the league who have great players who are underperforming and have had teammates play better than them than in years past, and it's been to massive, massive detriment, where you look around and you say, well, he's not playing well. What are they going to do? Look, by no measure is Connor McDavid playing poorly. He's having a very stereotypical McDavid season. He's going to finish between 110 and 120 points. That includes the 2 games he missed with the ankle injury. That includes the 3-game suspension for the hit on Connor Garland, the cross check on Connor Garland. But like, the Oilers are sitting here and they still have a lot of capacity for improvement. And I think that's the strongest argument as to why you should be bullish and optimistic about the Oilers' trajectory. That, yes, they dramatically improved in season. The penalty kill went from giving up a power play goal every 3rd penalty kill to effectively being close to an 80% power play since the end of November. That will play. You think about the turnaround they've gotten from some of the guys down the lineup where they moonlighted Podkolzin in the top 6, and he stuck there pretty much the rest of the way. And you think about the season that Darnell Nurse started out having, the terrible goal differential he had in all situations, and as penalty kill stabilized, as the Oilers found their optimal defensive deployment, Brett Kulak playing the most minutes he's ever played on average on a nightly basis, riding shotgun with Nurse. It's worked. To the Oilers' credit, they have found a way to make that work. And all of this is against the backdrop of knowing the Oilers are going to add ahead of the trade deadline. Now, what are they going to add? That's a great question. I have alternated between requesting a top 4 defenseman, just a defenseman, a top 9 forward. I think right now, as we sit here on February 7th, I think the Oilers' most pressing need is a top 9 forward that can push someone like Janmark or Connor Brown down to the 4th line. I think they absolutely could use another defenseman. Now, the quality of said defenseman, that's a little bit more ambiguous. You could say they just need a depth guy, so that way if someone gets hurt, he could step in. You could make an argument they probably need someone with some experience that could step in and push Troy Stecher out of being a regular. So there's options here. The Oilers have options, and the fact they've played as well as they have, even record-wise, even though, if you go through the box scores and the line items of every guy's individual stats, you would say a lot of guys on this team are underperforming their career averages. You would say that some people like Henrique, Nuge, Hyman even are going to be hard-pressed to meet their expectations coming into the season because there are Arvidsson and Skinner in there as well. And it hasn't really mattered a whole lot. The Oilers have continued to find ways to win, and that's the glass half full way of looking at this, that the Oilers haven't played their best hockey yet, and they've had a lot of guys underperforming their career expectations, and they are still where they're at standings-wise. Now, I don't think they're going to be able to run down the Jets for best record in the Western Conference. I think more likely than not, you're probably going to end up being the 2nd or 3rd best team. You want to stay ahead of Vegas if you can, because you want the more favorable matchups in the playoffs. But it is worth pointing out right now that if the playoffs started today, the Oilers would be playing the Avalanche in the first round because the Avalanche are in wild card 1. There is maybe an argument that the Oilers might be better suited to fall to that 2 spot and play the Kings in the first round again. But of course, we know this is professional sports. Teams are not going to sell. They are not going to intentionally lose games in means of trying to get a more favorable playoff matchup because guys are too competitive. There is no way you're going to convince a team of guys to go out there to play a competitive professional hockey game with no stakes, with telling them it doesn't matter if we win or lose, because that's just not how it works. In a sport where contact is assumed and a part of the game, you're not getting guys pulling punches. The other team doesn't know you're not trying. And if you're not trying out there, someone's going to get hurt. It's really a perilous situation to be in, and it's not something you're ever going to see teams do. So we're going to take our first break on today's show. When we come back, we're going to give the negative perspective. We're going to give the glass half empty. And then final segment, we'll tie it all together, what I personally think right after this. Looking for tickets to your next big event, whether it's a concert, a show, or a game, find the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Gametime Picks, it has never been easier. Let me explain. With Gametime Picks, the app does all the hard work. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Gametime Picks for a while now. Tonight, I'm going to Rangers Penguins, wanted to see Sidney Crosby. We're winding down, folks. Sidney Crosby, there's only so many more chances to get to see him play in person. Me and one of my friends are going to go tonight. We used Gametime. We picked up the super deal for a prime seat. We got a really good deal. And most importantly, we got a good view of the seat in the app with the seat view feature. Before we hit buy, I could see exactly what the seats were going to look like. It is reassuring. And the best part, you are covered with Gametime's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers heading on into the weekend. So, if you want to hear me be doomerist, number one, the Oilers lack speed. And it is a fundamental issue. It was a little bit less pressing last year. Guys like Warren Fogle, Dylan Holloway fit that build a little bit more of the speedy, annoying pest on the forecheck guys who could facilitate zone entries with their raw speed, dump the puck in and go and get it. And on this team, it's really just Connor on the zone entries. You could say Janmark and Connor Brown on the long stretch passes and transition and what they do really well on the penalty kill. Podkolzin has a good motor, but I wouldn't say he's got great foot speed. So I definitely think this Oilers team is a little bit slower than last year's iteration, a little bit less mobile. And in the playoffs where the game is faster and tighter, every last bit of advantage you can have speed-wise counts, and it's really helpful. So I do think that's a fundamental difference from last year's team to this year's team. I do want to report back on this. So one of the things I'm going to do as part of the series of episodes next week is just doing straight comparisons on the NHL Edge stats. I want to look at the skate speed. I want to look at the distance covered. And I want to see if what I'm watching lines up with what the statistics say, because it's important to be it's important to fact check. It's important to have accountability, because I want to give you guys actionable information so you know whether or not to get your hopes up. Number two, I think the goaltending issue will always be present. I think as anytime you don't have one of the truly elite guys, and even the elite guys aren't always a sure thing. You look at UC Saros' numbers this year. I think Shesterkin's having a reasonable season for what the Rangers are in front of him. But if you ask certain Ranger fans, you would think he was Judas for getting paid. It is not a guarantee that even a great goalie will be good in the playoffs. You can look at Connor Hellebuck last year, round one against Colorado. He had the worst save percentage in the playoffs last year. The Avs got the Jets out of there in relatively short order, and Stuart Skinner and Cal Picker do not have the pedigree that any of the bell cow goalies have. And look, I don't think goaltending is essential. I don't think elite goaltending is essential to winning a Stanley Cup. We have enough evidence over the last 5 to 10 years that if you just have slightly above average goaltending, you point to Binnington, Darcy Kemper, Aiden Hill, that's more than enough. You know, Bob's an all-timer. He's a Hall of Famer. Vasilevsky's a Hall of Famer. Braden Holtby had a really nice NHL career, but his prime probably wasn't long enough for Hall of Fame consideration, even though he was consistently a top 10 goalie during his time as the Capitals backstop. You go to Pittsburgh, you know, the Matt Murray, Marc-Andre Fleury tandem that was never really that intimidating, but they played behind a really good team, so they did their job. You know, I think if you wanted to draw some parallels to Stuart Skinner to Matt Murray, I think you would be reasonably in your assertion. Corey Crawford, fringe Hall of Fame guy. I think he's never I don't think Corey Crawford was ever as good as his numbers were because of the quality of the team he played on. Jonathan Quick is a hockey Hall of Famer, as much as I still don't think he was ever that good on the Kings, because the Kings were an elite defensive team. You think about that Bruins team with Tim Thomas, who put together one of the all-time great playoff performances. But anytime you are going into the playoffs without one of those elite guys, you always got to take a little bit of pause. And look, if you're playing Colorado, Mackenzie Blackwood does not scare me. You know, if you look around the West, frankly, most of these goalies do not worry me. You know, Aiden Hill, yeah, he's won a cup. Jake Ottinger, the Oilers beat him last year. Demko wasn't healthy, but I think the Oilers would be able to beat him. Philip Gustafson of the Wild is having a nice season, but again, I'm not particularly worried. Darcy Kemper's having a nice season for the Kings, but again, I'm not that worried. You know, the only goalie in the West who really gives me pause is Connor Hellebuck, but the quality of the team in front of Connor Hellebuck is why I would still think the Oilers are a better team. And look, I understand the Jets have a significantly better record. I understand they got out to like the 15-0-1 start, and they have a beautiful points cushion to lean on down the stretch here. But if you go guy to guy, the Oilers' star power is astronomical in comparison. Like Kyle Connor's having a tremendous season. Mark Scheifele is having a really nice bounce back year, but like Connor and Leon are better than anyone on that team. Hyman is probably a little bit lower caliber of a player than Kyle Connor, but like, I think that's not really my concern. But goaltending wise, Stuart Skinner is not a sure thing. And look, no goalie is a sure thing, but he can definitely give you a bit of agita. He can definitely elevate your blood pressure a little bit with some of the decisions he makes. And look, if Calvin Pickard has to start for any extended period of time in the playoffs, I would say the Oilers are probably in serious trouble because he's just not that caliber of player. You cannot expect someone who's been a fringe backup for a while to start playoff games for an extended period of time. One or two, like last year, that's different. The spot start individual game, that's different. An extended period of time, 5 or 6 games, you're not going to be able to be competitive with Calvin Pickard for a whole playoff series against the quality of opponent you're going to have in the playoffs. Number 3, as good as the Oilers defense has been this year, and the underlying numbers support that, they give up the fewest high danger chances per game in the entire NHL at 5-on-5. That's very encouraging. The penalty kill since the end of November has been lights out. That said, we saw this defensive group in the playoffs and I know it's different. I know there's no Broberg. I know there's no CC. I understand that. I still worry about guys like Emberson and Stetcher who just haven't played a lot of playoff hockey. Emberson has never played in a playoff game. I think Troy Stetcher has less than 15 career playoff games, if I remember correctly. I'm going to fact check that right now, but I want to say he has 21 career playoff games. He had 4 with the Kings 3 years ago, and he had 17 on the Vancouver team that was in the bubble that went to the second round, but not a lot of playoff experience. And I am not ready to say that's the team's weak link, even though on paper it's definitely the team's weak link. But I think goaltending, defense, and then I do have to address it. The depth scoring is giving me cause for concern. I really like the group the Oilers have assembled. I think it's got a good diversity of talent and skill sets. But when you look down the sheet right now, Leon has 38, Connor has 22, Hyman has 19, Nuge has 15, Jeff Skinner, who's only played 48 games, has 10, and Corey Perry has 10. After that, the drop-off starts. You've got defensemen with 9 and 7, Connor Brown, Arvidsson, and Henrique all have 7. Podkolzin has 6. Kapanen has 5. Janmark has 2. Derek Ryan, before he got sent down, had 1. The Oilers do have goal issues. They need to score more. If you want to win in today's NHL, you got to score a lot of goals. And you can get by with good defense and timely goal scoring in the regular season. But the expectations in the postseason are higher. You need to be better. You need to score more goals. It is that straightforward. In today's league, especially with this defensive group, it's not realistic for the Oilers to say, we're going to be able to win these games 2-1, 3-2. Yeah, some of the time. To have that as your only path to victory is not realistic. And look, I think there's probably a little bit of room for some of those guys like Skinner, like Nuge, like Henrique, like Podkolzin, and even, frankly, even Arvidsson to be better the final stretch of games than they were in the first half. I think they need to find a little more offense, and that means more consistent chance creation. And frankly, that just means finishing better. A lot of these guys are under their career averages for shooting percentage, which gives me pause. I know it's been harder to generate offense this year league-wide. That's not just an Oilers issue. So one of the things I do want to investigate before during the course of next week when I have a little bit of extra time is just comparing team by team how much teams are off their career shooting percentages, because I do think that's useful information to determine whether or not this is an Oilers thing or if this is a league-wide thing and reflects some greater shift within the game. So we're going to take one final break on today's show. When we come back, we are going to tackle my opinion, what I think. Be right back. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers as we get you set for the weekend, the game against the Avalanche tonight, and then a nice little layoff. Four Nations action picks up on the 13th of next week, so lots to talk about until then. So the tentative plan for next week is to do evaluations for the three position groups: forwards, defense, goaltending. We'll do it on a player-by-player basis. Some guys will warrant more conversation than others. So if you're expecting, 3 minutes on Ty Emberson, you're probably going to be a little disappointed. But we're going to cover as much as we can next week. Use next week as an evaluation period to emphasize points within the team that warrant further conversation, that maybe warrant correction or warrant accolade, warrant praise for the way they've performed so far. So there's a lot of discussion to be had, even if the Oilers won't be on the ice themselves. I'm looking forward to Four Nations, even though I am definitely a little bit nervous. Anytime you're playing a contact sport like hockey, weird things can happen. You don't want to see anyone get hurt. You don't want to see anybody miss time when the season resumes in 2 weeks, because that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to have best on best hockey as a precursor and an evaluation for the Winter Olympics next year in Italy, which are going to be awesome. It's a long time coming for the NHL to get back to the Winter Olympics, and there is no better forum to grow casual hockey, grow the casual hockey audience than the Olympics, which are, a communal shared experience. One of the few things that people still care about. The TV ratings for the Summer Olympics this year were great in comparison to the last two Summer Olympics. So I think that's something that's worth considering as well. I think a lot of people were really excited, frankly, and it's an opportunity. But as far as our Oilers, and where I, the host of Locked On Oilers, am at through 54 games, I am more inclined to lean towards the glass half full side of things, purely because if a team is consistently winning without everything lining up at the same time, that tells you there's room for improvement, and actionable room for improvement. If this were a team struggling for a playoff spot, if the Oilers were in the spot the Canucks were in, and I was trying to make the case that, well, they're still pretty good, they just got to line it up, that would kind of ring hollow. That wouldn't have the same tenor as me saying they've been good so far. They have the capacity to be even better. That, I think, is a lot easier to convince yourself of than saying a team that's, been around 500 all year is going to rattle off a 650 win percentage over the final 30 games to make the playoffs. It's just based on what you have seen, the Oilers are at the very least a good team with the capacity to be great, with a deadline move or two to be made, with some positive regression for some key depth players as augmentation. You have the eventual return of Evander Kane, whether that's in the regular season or game one of the playoffs, as another forward who's capable of contributing offense. So the goal scoring, I think, might be indicative of a larger league-wide thing where guys are just scoring fewer goals because it's harder to get shots on goal. That's something I'm going to investigate next week as well. I think the goaltending question will remain the most pressing. I think when you read national media, when you listen to podcasts, when you listen to casual fans, they'll say, yeah, the Oilers are pretty good, but I don't trust Stuart Skinner. And I think that's a reasonable hesitation because he is not an elite goalie. And like we said in that second segment, if you don't have an elite goalie, the volatility of a average to above average goalie, that's a swing, man. That's a goal every other game, the difference between an above average and a good goalie. And one goal every other game doesn't sound like a lot, but when it's best 4 out of 7, one goal every other game is the difference between going to Cancun and going to the next round. So you really need as many ducks in a row as you can get. And if the Oilers can get above average, borderline good goaltending, I think that's enough. I think if the Oilers can get above average goaltending with the way they've played in front of Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard this year, I do think that's enough. And as far as the defense, I like what I have seen. The quality of chances against being as low as they are is really important. And I think it shows a discernible sign of improvement from last year. I think Darnell Nurse getting himself right as the season went along has made a big difference. He started out very rough. He would tell you that himself. But as the season's gone along, he's played better. Playing with Brett Kulak has helped him immensely this season. We'll dive into that pairing and why that's worked with more than just the underlying numbers. We'll look at transition stuff too. And that's the good part about having next week with no games is I have extra time to dive into research and doing data analysis and trying to present a case for or against. And in summation, I think this Oilers team is at worst the third best team in the West. Right now, as we sit here, the only team I would say that is definitively better in the regular season is Winnipeg. I would pick Edmonton to beat Winnipeg. I think Edmonton is a better, more talented team. Of course, more talent doesn't always necessarily mean you're going to win, and then the other team that gives me pause is Vegas in the Western Conference, that is. I think the Oilers are better than Dallas. I think they're better than pretty much anyone else. I think they're better than Colorado, Vancouver, Calgary, LA. I don't think, even Minnesota, I don't think Minnesota's in the caliber of team that the Oilers are in. So if you're going to tell me their two hard playoff series are going to be Vegas in either the conference final or the second round, and then whoever comes out of the Central, whether that's Winnipeg, Minnesota, or Dallas, I think that's doable. Your goal, and look, this isn't really a goal because you can't control who you play, but ideally, your path matters almost as much as how good you are. If you can get an easy first round matchup, if you can get an easier second round matchup, not even an easy one, just because by the time you get to the final 8 teams, there are no easy games left, but you want to put yourself in a position where all you have to do is worry about what's in front of you. And the Oilers have done that. And the everydayers, the people who listen every day, watch every day, know we've been talking about the Oilers making incremental progress with each passing week, each passing month. So the minimum is higher. We talk about high floor, high ceiling. As the Oilers have gone on, they've been able to get away with some of their lower quality performances because they've established a high baseline, a high minimum floor. And the goal now is to find the upper boundary of the ceiling. The ceiling is the roof, as Michael Jordan once so eloquently said. How can the Oilers make the ceiling the roof? That's your goal here, because it's not just enough to be a good regular season team, because by the time the playoffs start, you want to be firing on all cylinders so you can peak at the right time and you can win 16 games over the course of 2.5 months. That is the end goal here. It is not to win the President's Trophy. It's not to win the Pacific Division. Those are nice. Those are nice accolades, but that's not what we're here for. Oilers are here to win a Stanley Cup in the last year of cost-controlled McDavid, Draisaitl, and Bouchard. After this year, maintaining is going to continue to get more and more. Thank you to everyone who listened or watched today's show. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, get a notification whenever new content goes live. I will talk to you guys on Monday as we dive into the Four Nations face-off break. I'll see you guys then. Everyone have a safe and fun weekend. Talk soon.